Please join me in welcoming Eric Whitaker.
Woo! I genuinely was tearing up backstage. I can't believe we're all here together in the same room. This is the first time in 2 years, I can say this honestly, that I have spoken to a group of people while wearing pants. It's true. It's really true. It's been a rough 2 years, hasn't it? I gave COVID a chance there at the beginning, but I can now say I'm not a fan. Not a fan at all. Just Lou mentioned the virtual choirs. I won't talk much about that tonight, but it is worth saying that I know during the pandemic, many of you made virtual choirs, and to that I say to each of you, I'm so sorry. You now know what a pain in the neck they are, and also you know, and it's important to say this out loud, you know that they will never be a substitute for what we're doing right here this weekend. Like all of us, I had a lot of time on my hands the past couple of years. In fact, the last time I stood in front of a choir was 2 years ago at this conference, where I had the incredible honor and privilege of conducting the Bob Cole Chamber Choir in Salt Lake City. Hey guys. And during that time, I had a lot of time to reflect, and I had a lot of things to discover about myself. First, being that it turns out I'm not a real blonde. Not at all. When you can't see a hairdresser for a year and a half, things get real really quickly. The other thing that I discovered is that music making together in the same room is, for me, like all of you, oxygen. It is everything. I missed it so much. I can't begin to tell you. Well, I'm literally preaching to the choir right now. I ached for it daily. I still ached for it. As I was preparing my thoughts for tonight, I thought what I'd like to do is talk about the actual art of conducting. We're here together. Most of us are conductors. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to tell a couple of stories from my past and then lessons that I've learned about conducting through those lessons that I could only have discovered in this time of real reflection. I learned to conduct the hard way. Back in 1992, 30 years ago, David Weiler, my mentor and the man to whom I owe everything, was teaching at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He just retired this past year. David had let me conduct a couple of sectionals, and then he suggested to me, why don't you sign up for this conducting workshop at the 1992 ACDA conference that was in Hawaii. I literally had never conducted a 4 pattern. I don't know why he said that this would be a good idea, but I applied for it and I was accepted. Probably there were only 2 other people that applied. And I got to work with Dennis Schrock, and I conducted through Tu es Petrus, the Palestrina. I remember very clearly that Dennis asked me, what does clave mean? You know, just making sure that I knew what the text meant. And I just knew what a clavichord was from my synthesizer days. And I said, key? He said, excellent. And I'm just beaming. I'm a conductor now. And after that conference, I got the bug, and I asked David will you let me conduct some more sectionals? And again, I think he let me one more time stand in front of the choir and do part of a rehearsal. And inexplicably, he said to me, why don't you come to the College Light Opera Company this summer? All right, the College Light Opera Company is a theater company, full orchestra, 32 singing and dancing and acting members that do 9 operettas and musicals in 9 weeks. Can you imagine? So while you're performing the show that you learned last week at night in front of a paid audience, fully staged with costumes, you're learning the show then for next week during the day. It's impossible. And there were 2 associate conductors so that we would trade off week on week, just a grind of music. And I had come to classical music very late. I started learning to read music about the age of 19, 20. And now I found myself not only at the College Light Opera Company, but conducting my very first musical, West Side Story. And I remember going to the principal conductor. I was supposed to prepare the singers, prepare the orchestra, get everything ready to go and conduct one of the performances, and asking her genuinely, can you explain what 9/8 means? I don't understand how there can be a 9 and an 8. And she was very patient. Can you imagine your associate conductor coming to you and asking you this at the beginning of the summer? And I remember sitting for 2 weeks in my room before the season started with my headphones going, I want to be in America, okay, da, 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 da. And that's so imprinted in my mind that one of the very first pieces I wrote when I got back was called With a Lily in Your Hand, which is, ya, da, 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 da. It's basically just, I want to be in America. And I learned to kind of triage conducting. You know, when you're conducting musical theater and you're learning that fast, you don't have time to really absorb anything. What you learn is you turn the page and you look for meter changes and for modas. That's basically it. And you start to get a 35,000-foot view of conducting. It's trial by fire, but it's really the best way I found to conduct. Because you start to see conducting that what it is at its core is keeping a group of people together. Nothing focuses the mind like hearing an entire orchestra and a group of dancers and singers start to go off the rails. You get very, very clear very, very quickly. And I am so appreciative for that experience and learning those foundations of conducting that way. And while I was there at College Like Opera Company, I met another conductor named John Morris Russell. Now, John Morris Russell was an orchestral conductor. And John was, well, I can sum it up perfectly. John thought that there were only 3 conducting gestures you needed. One was this, one was this, and one was this. That's signing the check at the end of the gig. He's an amazing conductor, an amazing man. He's now conducting with the Cincinnati Pops. But for years and years, I took on John's style. And I can look back at those early photos of myself conducting, and you can actually see veins in my arms and my neck. I was just going to conduct the hell out of whoever was in front of me. And it brings me to the first big lesson that I'd like to share with you, which is one that I learned from Don Brenniger. Don, are you in the audience tonight, Maestro? Yeah, he's here. I was still a student, and I had been invited to conduct a performance of Water Night, a piece that I had written recently. And I was working with the group, and then I got up and I conducted the performance. And as I remember it, there were several different choirs working on stage. Anyway, I finished conducting Water Night, and I sat down next to Don in the audience. And I remember as I came off the audience, I thought, you know, they sing so brassy. It's so loud and kind of flat and ugly. Even though I had told the singers many, many times, don't sing like that. You can see where this is going, right? And Don just very sweetly and gently leaned over and whispered to me, you realize that everything you do, they're doing, right? And I remember kind of looking at him and he said, just your body, your throat, your arms. Like they just showed me with the gestures. We talked about it later, and he gave me a lot more advice, but I didn't believe it at first. I genuinely didn't believe it. I thought that's ludicrous. They're going to sing. They're autonomous from me. But what I realized quickly is that actually choral singing, conducting and singing with a choir is perhaps the greatest mirror we have. That not only do the singers reflect what you're doing in your body, they reflect everything. I started realizing that if I gave myself a strong foundation, low breath, gentle shoulders, made my hands in the shape of soft palate that's loose and lean, and just breathe light, that suddenly the sound changed instantly. You all know this alchemy that can really only happen with singers. It's extraordinary. And the bigger lesson, as I started to reflect on this over the past couple of years, is actually that mirror extends to the people themselves. That a bit like parents with children, the singers are tracking everything we do as conductors. They're learning from us passion, they're learning from us joy, they're learning focus, they're learning emotional vulnerability. And then, of course, they're learning all the technical things. They're learning about languages, about breath. And what we're doing as we stand up there is a huge, awesome responsibility as conductors. It's more than simply making music or getting everybody to sing at the same time, or even to get them to sing healthily. We're actually helping them, I believe, become better citizens. The second lesson I'd like to share with you begins with my first piece, Go Lovely Rose. So I was at that time 3 years into my 7-year undergraduate degree. I took a couple of victory laps. And until then, I had been singing in the big campus choir, and I had auditioned for the small chamber group and been accepted. And David Weiler had this beautiful tradition where every year the choir would perform a different setting of the same poem, Go Lovely Rose. I think at the time there were maybe 5 or 6 musical settings, and the most famous, and I think still most famous, was by Halsey Stevens. And we sang that in my first year, and I loved everything about it. Any of you who know the text to Go Lovely Rose, it ends with how small a part of time they share that are so wondrous, sweet, and fair, which is just beautiful, and it's the ultimate choir text. It's the kind of thing that you can sing at the end of the semester and hold hands and cry. You'll never see these people again. And I wrote my setting not really reading music all that well. I could get what was in my head down on the page, but I had to have some friends help me with the harmonic spelling. And I gave it to David, not expecting anything, just a humble gift from a grateful student to his mentor. And David surprised me. The next day he had made copies and he handed it out in class, and we read through it. And I will never forget hearing me in the hearts and souls and breath and mind of my colleagues and my friends being brought to light, just something bigger than myself. And I knew that day, somehow, some way, I would be a composer. Now, what I could not have ever counted on was that David not only performed it at the little home concert that we had there in Las Vegas, but that year we'd been accepted to sing at that very same conference in Hawaii in 1992. And David chose to end his program in Hawaii with my little piece. I look back at that now, and I just can't imagine why he did that. I mean, I'm proud of the piece. It is what it is. But David was doing something much, much bigger than that. Not only was he celebrating the tradition of choir and this tradition that had been passed down from his high school director of using Go Lovely Rose, but he was also actively elevating this young student. He was giving me this opportunity that it's unspeakable. I can't believe that it happened. And reflecting on that over these past couple of years, I firmly believe now that conductors are creators, that we're building the music of the future, and we do this by commissioning and premiering pieces. I wrote this down. David Weiler, Dr. Bruce Mayhall, Dr. Joe Michael Scheibe, Dr. Edie Copley, Dr. Jocelyn K. Jensen, Kimberly Ritzer-Barkley, Dr. Ron Staley, and Dr. Ron Keene. Every one of these conductors premiered or commissioned a choral work of mine while I was still a student. Can you imagine that level of dedication and championship? And I know that there's a big focus on composing here at the conference this year. And it makes me so glad, so excited to see all of these other composers being given the opportunity. What I'd like to do at this moment is just challenge each and every one of you conductors in the audience to find that composer. It's probably a student in your choir, and it's somebody who just maybe has just a hint of an ambition to make a piece. Coax that out of them and let them experience that. You'll be making the music that our children and their children will be singing. Finally, I often tell the story about how I first came into choir, that I didn't know the first thing about classical music. David Weiler convinced me to sing. I went in, the Mozart Requiem was the first thing I got to hear, and I became the world's biggest choir geek after that. The part of the story that I don't often get to tell is the story right before that. And I had shown up at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, only because I grew up in Nevada, and Las Vegas was the state school that was furthest from home at the time. I'm just speaking truth now here. And I knew I loved music. I guess I thought that I wanted to be in music. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was going to be an astrophysicist and a pop star. And I'm not good at math, and you can't study pop. So all right. So here I am at college, and I learned that there were these music auditions. and that what you could do is you could audition for a scholarship. And I thought, this is terrific, help pay the rent, and I'll absolutely audition. And I remember going in, and they asked, what instrument do you play? And I said, keyboard. And they thought I meant harpsichord or piano. I meant synthesizers. And they said, well, why don't you play something from your repertoire? And I didn't know what that word meant. I had no idea what a repertoire was. So I said, well, I just sort of play. I can't imagine how cocky and arrogant and green and naive I was. And so I sat down at the piano, and I don't know what I improvised 80s pop. God knows what I played to this jury of professors. And I was not given a scholarship. I think almost immediately I was not given a scholarship. But in the room at the time was David Weiler. And David immediately grabbed me. My memory is that he actually took my arm and led me out of the room. We walked across the hall, and he handed me a score and said, I want you to sing this bottom line, and I'm going to play these 3 lines above it, okay? So we start in. I can't even start. It's hieroglyphics to me. It must have been a Bach chorale or something now that I look back on it. And David said, can you sing this? And so he played me the bass line, the first couple bars. And that I could do. If I'd heard it, yep, I could parrot that, no problem. And I remember him looking at me kind of strangely, and he said, can you sing this? And he played, I don't know what he played, but something thornier. And I was able to parrot that and follow along. And then David invited me to come sing with this big choir. And for years and years, as I retold this story in my mind, it was because David saw in me this diamond in the rough. He saw all of this talent and exuberance. Looking back on it now over the past couple of years and really examining that story, and especially having now spent nearly 30 years conducting, I think what David saw in me is that I was a bass and I was alive. I really believe those were the only 2 criteria that got me into choir. And as I reflected on that, I thought, well, he's doing what we all do, which is recruiting. And I thought more about this idea of recruiting. And, recruiting is sometimes a bad word, and it's just a thing that every conductor does. We are endlessly looking for that unicorn of a tenor who reads music. They're out there somewhere. But always, like evangelists, we're just pulling people into the flock wherever we can find them. And as the world went silent and we stopped singing, I realized that actually that kind of thing that we do is now essential. It's essential to the health of our art form. So first and foremost, what I want to say to each and every one of you out there who kept the flame alive during all of this time, thank you. Thank you. That somehow you kept singers engaged. I'm sure you must have lost some people just through the craziness of the past 2 years. Thank you for keeping the flame alive. And this, then, my second challenge for the night, is that continue the good work with recruiting. Double down your efforts. Find people who are just interested, just pull them into choir. For the health of our art form, we need every single person singing. Back in 2010, I guess it is now, when I first released the virtual choir and started doing international press, each virtual choir was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I kept getting asked this question, actually, have I become an evangelist for singing? Is this my goal, is to get people singing? And I always resisted that. I always thought, no, actually our art form is perfect. Nothing even needs to be changed about it. We just do our thing and people will find the light. But what I believe now is that singing is more than just singing. It's more than just making music. I could go on and on and on about the health benefits of singing. We know from study after study that it's simply good for you. It helps with mindfulness, with compassion, with empathy. It helps in studies that aren't even related to music. Students who sing are just simply better students. I think it's the silver bullet. I think if it were up to me, if I were president of the world, every single class would start with 5 minutes of singing, and every school would start singing together every morning. It's a no-brainer. And I'm a big fan of the arts. I love orchestra, I love chorus, I love dancing, I love film, I love the theater arts. I believe choral music is separate. I believe choral music is a whole brain experience, and it's the only one that uses your body completely. I suppose you could argue dance, but dancers don't hate me for this. I don't know how much of your brain you use when you're dancing, really. It's a full body experience, you know what I'm saying? But choral music for me is the silver bullet. And what we're finally doing, I believe, is we're more than making music. As choir conductors, we are building communities. We're making communities. We also know from the health studies that what is so beneficial about it is feeling part of something larger than yourself, which is why the astonishing studies that were done while we were making virtual choirs showed almost the same health benefits as singing together in a room, a traditional choir, because people felt part of something larger than themselves. Ultimately, I think that's what we're doing. We're making communities, and I think it's essential. It makes me so happy to see all of us here together tonight as a community. And if I can be at my most California tonight, I thought, is there a phrase at all that sums up what it is I think a conductor's job is, more than just keeping people together and breathing at the same time? And it's a line from a Buddhist teaching that means a great deal to me. May I be a boat, a bridge, a raft for all those who wish to cross the water. I think there's a lot of people out there who would like to cross the water, and that's our job, is to bring them to the light. Thank you so very much. Have a beautiful conference, and be well.